The leaders in that period were not the mayor, not the president. It was 4 college freshmen that started the sit-in movement. So it was actually high school kids who got upset because their parents couldn't register to vote that got the Voting Rights Act. See? And so in all of my lifetime, social change has come from the young while they were in school. See?
Will it
be unbroken by and by, Lord, by and by? There's a better on my way down in the sky, Lord, in the sky.
You are listening to Will the Circle Be Unbroken? A personal history of the civil rights movement in 5 Southern communities and the music from those times. During the 1940s and 50s, the Atlanta style emerged as the city's response to racial conflict. Accommodation and compromise guided the approach of the city's leaders, black and white. Warren Cochran was a member of the small group of ministers, academics, business and professional men who made up Atlanta's black leadership.
Now, we didn't have strength enough or voting power enough to elect anybody in those days. And what we had to do was use whatever strategy we could. We worked with the business community because they wanted the best leadership we could get. They did not want rabble-rousers. Our job was to keep rabble-rousers out.
Following the victory of democracy in World War II and the historic 1954 Supreme Court decision outlawing segregation, no small group of men of any color could manage the forces of racial change. A new, younger generation would challenge the Atlanta style.
There is something on your mind by the way you look at me. There is something on your mind.
Each college student at that time, especially black college students, brought with them a peculiar kind of history that made everything gel, 2 or 3 years later.
There was this accumulation of things that pushed on the minds of young people, young black people in 1960.
And what you thinking, bring a happiness. Oh,
Young black American students coming of age at the end of the 50s had grown up in a period of rising expectations. They'd witnessed the Montgomery bus boycott on TV and followed the efforts of Little Rock students in the pages of Jet magazine. In 1960, Julian Bond was a student at Morehouse College in Atlanta.
They had these Little Rock kids who were our peers, and they were so brave and so courageous that you couldn't help but say, gee, I hope if I'm ever tested in this way, I can behave the same way. Our classmates included African students who were so smug in their condemnation of our inaction. They'd say, listen, we're freeing our nations, we're leading revolutions, we're escaping the yoke of colonialism. All of Africa will be free before you people can drink a cup of coffee. And that hurt, that hurt.
Student Morris Dillard.
The pain had reached a point where all you needed was a spark. And in the form of a tool, of a mechanism through which you could protest. And of course that was provided by the sit-in movement in North Carolina, in Greensboro.
On February 1st, 1960, 4 black college students startled the nation when they sat in at a segregated lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina. By April, thousands of young people were sitting in across the South.
Woo, come on, everybody.
It had happened other places before, and they never caught on, they never spread. Why did it catch on when it happened in Greensboro? It may have been that the Associated Press and United Press broadcast fairly neutral descriptions of what was happening. And any newspaper reader could pick that up and say, oh, this is how you do it. It's like an instruction manual.
Atlanta students took note of this new strategy, where young, committed activists would simply sit in at segregated facilities, refusing to leave when they were denied service because of their race. Direct and confrontational, as a tactic, it was a radical departure from the Atlanta tradition of quiet compromise and private negotiation. Morehouse College students Julian Bond and Lonnie King recall how Atlanta's new era of public protest began.
On the 2nd of February 1960, I was talking to one of my best friends at the time, a guy named Joseph Pierce. We were reading the paper and I was talking about what happened up in Greensboro.
I was in Yates and Moulton's drugstore one day, which was a campus hangout, killing time between classes, smoking and drinking coffee. And a fellow came up to me, and I didn't know him well at all. He showed me a newspaper headline from the Atlanta Daily World. It said, Greensboro students sit in for third day.
And I said, Julian, you see this newspaper? Had you read it?
He said, don't you think it ought to happen here? I said, I'm sure it will.
I said, I think we need to make it happen, and I'd like to have you help us.
I said, what do you mean, we? He said, you take this side of the drugstore and I'll take the other side, and we'll put together a little meeting of students.
I think at this point an absolutely arbitrary demand is required.
We didn't even discuss it at all until the student typewriter.
At the meeting, the students decided to involve all 6 of Atlanta's black colleges in the effort. The college presidents soon got word of things and encouraged the student leaders to draft the list of their grievances. Student leader Mary Ann Smith.
We were very attentive to what the presidents had to say, and they said that we will sponsor this, we'll pay for it. You know, you students write it, express your grievances in writing, expose it to the world, well, through the Atlanta General Constitution, and we'll pay for it. And maybe we can initiate some activity this way, some across the table type meetings, negotiations, and what have you.
Well, this very first statement we put in the paper, the Appeal for Human Rights, listed a long list of grievances. I mean, the police protection, the extension of city services, parks, and things like that. So from the very first, there was this sense that this was about more than lunch counters.
We published it on, about the 12th of March in 1960, where we set forward, certain things.
We want to state clearly and unequivocally that we cannot tolerate in a nation professing democracy and among people professing Christianity the discriminating conditions under which the Negro is living today in Atlanta, Georgia, supposedly one of the most progressive cities in the South.
It caused a shock wave to go through the Atlanta community when it was published. Governor Vandiver, who was famous as No Not One Vandiver, no not one black child will ever enter a Georgia public school while I'm Governor Vandiver, said this sounds as if it had been written in Moscow, if not in Peking.
That statement was skillfully prepared. Obviously, it was not written by students. Regrettably, it had the same overtones which are usually found in anti-American propaganda pieces.
Well, all of a sudden, you are, I won't say celebrity, but because it was published in the New York Times, I think, New York Times, letters came in.
Will the Circle Be Unbroken was written and produced for the Southern Regional Council by George King. Senior Associate Producer, Randall Williams. Funding for the series was provided by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I'm Verta Mae Grosvenor.